All right, everybody. People are just starting to come in, and I am monitoring the participants and making sure people get in. Also, we have a chat. And yes, Sherry, the videos will be available on youtube.com/hackbuddyorg. So be sure to go there and subscribe. That's where we'll put both of our videos from Tinder and tonight's video today. So yeah, just real quick, I guess I'll talk about the group because a lot of people have questions. A lot of people are first timers. So the name of the group has historically always been JavaScript LA, and our website is javascriptla.net. We have decided to change our name in a couple areas. So the full name now is really HackBuddy, but we want to continue supporting JavaScript LA because a lot of people are still referring to us as JavaScript LA. So as best as we can, we'll try to support a lot of the older links. But that said, if you want to follow us and make sure that you're on all of our proper social media, be sure to go to javascriptla.net first, the website, and then there is a small post about all of our updated URLs for social media like YouTube. That's where the videos will go, as well as Instagram if you like Instagram, or Twitter. A lot of devs actually like Twitter, so you can go there and you can follow us, and I think it's a good place to just kind of network anyway. Let me close that for real quick. But essentially, you should be able to also get a sense of what meetups are coming up. It is Halloween, so that's why we've got this orange pumpkin as our mascot. But generally, it's a yellow, happy HackBuddy guy. So we also have Slack. We have Discord. And I recommend that, if you like chatting with us, you get on either medium. So I'm going to move these to the side, actually. And basically, the one that I preferred is Discord, just because Discord makes it really easy to, do a lot of like other integrations without having to pay for it. So Slack, you kind of have to have a corporate account if you want to do some fun stuff. Discord, you don't really need that. I will also just quickly talk about Team Hack, which is a new thing that we're doing. And basically what that is it's an open source community where you can go and help us out with projects and build your own resume, So I know a lot of you kind of come to me and say, hey, these meetups are great, but I actually want to, find a job, I want to, improve my skills. So that's what this is all about. Essentially, we have a GitHub ourselves. It's github.com/team-hack. And basically, you'll want to go there and just start taking a look at the repo. The easiest way to get started is take a look at the coding guidelines. That's the repo you want to start with. And then basically read the getting started MD. So that will help you kind of understand what's going on, how to get started. And like I said, it's a way to build projects together. People from JavaScript LA and HackBuddy are coming together to kind of build, a lot of business stuff, web stuff. So things like dashboards, scrapers, chat apps, APIs. And then we use like technologies like React, Mongo, Next, which Ben is going to be talking about tonight. So all you have to do is just sign up. Again, the URL is teamhack.org. If you're not sure, you can just go to javascriptla.net. We will have a hackbuddy.com. We actually do have the site hackbuddy.com and hackbuddyorg if people want to jump ahead and take a look at that, but it's not finished. So, but that will be the future site. But basically, you can get to any of these things I mentioned from the main site javascriptla.net right now, and you can click into those things. So, hope that makes sense. I see people kind of coming in still. If you missed sort of what I was saying and you're on the tail end of that conversation, feel free to leave questions in the chat and I'll respond to you as I can throughout the presentation. Yeah, as this is a pretty much, live meeting, we ask that you mute yourself unless you actually want to ask a question. And at that point, basically it might be best if you just kind of wait for Ben to ask first. Does anybody have any questions? And then basically you could jump in there. We will also network a little bit. I'll give people time to do that before and after. So right after I finish, like maybe a minute or so, but then like afterwards, we'll also network a little bit more. If you have questions about anything that you hear, even for, what I was saying, feel free at that time to say whatever you need to. And then I also just want to recommend or remind everybody essentially that this is a business professional meetup group. So even though it is casual and relaxed, we do expect everybody, on the call to act professionally. Do not slander somebody else. Do not insult. Do not do things that your mother would not approve of, essentially, right? Don't try to scam anybody, because if you do those things, then you will be removed from the group. All right. Any questions? Okay. Anybody want to just say something like network? If not, I'll hand it over to Ben. Got a question. Where were you going to drop the links you mentioned in the chat? Definitely. So the links website is, again, javascriptla.net. And I'm just going to put that here. And let's see. The other one was teamhack.org.
No!
And then the link that we'll have in the future is the hackbuddy.com site. That is live, but again, it's not finished. So we hope to have that one done pretty soon. All right. If there are no real questions, then, or no further questions, then I'm going to hand it over to Ben.
Yeah, sweet, thanks. One sec, let me share my screen, and then we will be off to the races. All right. I assume that you can see this intro.
Well, yeah.
All right.
Oh, wait, sorry, stop share. One sec. Sorry, I shared the wrong screen. Desktop 2. Okay, take 2. You can see my slide. Everyone's good?
Yep.
Sweet. Let me pull up my speaker notes, and then, like I said, we will be off to the races. Yeah, so as far as questions go, I did reserve a little bit of time at the end for questions, so we can do questions at the end in like a live format. However, if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, like as you think of them. And I'll, at the end, I'll just read through the whole chat and we'll grab all the questions and just address them like that. So if you do have questions while I'm going, feel free either just to write it in the chat really quick or hold it till the end, but we'll answer them all at the end anyways. Today we're going to be talking about Next.js, and I wasn't able to make it to the meetup on Thursday, so I'm not 100% sure whether Next.js came up at that meetup, but I'm sure many of you have been, maybe you've heard about it, maybe you've played with it a little, and you're hoping to get a little more information about it. Maybe you just graduated a boot camp and you've worked with React, but you've heard about this Next.js thing. You see it on maybe some job postings, stuff like that. So we're going to be doing an intro to Next.js, not a comprehensive guide to Next.js. It is a rather big piece of technology, and there's no way that I can teach all of Next.js or do a tutorial in 30 minutes. But what I can do is show everyone why I think it's a really valuable piece of technology and why I think it's amazing and what I love about Next.js and why it's maybe worth your time going through a tutorial, why it's worth even checking out the docs. So yeah, before we get any further, tiny bit about me. I am a musician. So I came from, before dev, I played bass. I was a freelance bassist. I worked in the Los Angeles area for a few years playing upright bass, which you can see in the background on this side, and electric bass as well. So that's why I put a little guitar as the icon. A few years ago, I started getting into development. And as of today, I'm a senior front-end engineer. I work a lot with React, TypeScript, JavaScript, CSS, web performance, you name it, you got it, right? And so And as far as Next.js goes, I've been working with Next.js for the past 3 years. And while 3 years may not sound like a long time, but in some ways, like in JavaScript framework land, 3 years can be incredibly long. I was just looking back today at what versions Next.js was on when I first started. And when I first started 3 years ago, they had released version 3. And yesterday at the Global Next.js conference, they released version 10. So I've been with Next.js through 7 major versions, and I've been building side projects, commercial projects, everything in between, right? So small blogs, really big products, a lot of automotive marketplaces, and all that great stuff. So I'm really excited to share all this stuff with you. In addition, here's my socials if you're interested in staying up to date with what I'm doing. I can be found on Twitter at BenjaminJ. That's also my GitHub handle if you're into following people on GitHub. And then I recently just started streaming code on Twitch as well. So if you're interested in seeing that, if you're interested in seeing a lot of live coding, if you like what you hear today and you want to hear more of it, I'm streaming on Twitch at Benjamin D. Johnson. So feel free to check me out there. If you follow me, you'll be notified anytime that I go live. And then lastly, if you prefer the written word, I do write from time to time on my website, benjaminjohnson.me, where you can see my spicy takes and my tutorials that I write from time to time. So before we go full on into Next.js, I also want to start with a little illustration and a story. As a musician, and as a bassist, I worked a lot with a lot of guitarists. And if there's anything I can tell you about electric guitarists is they love pedals. In some ways, pedals are a third of the instrument in electric guitar. In electric guitar, your instrument is the actual guitar itself, the amplifier, and those are the 2 most important parts of your instrument. But the pedals have the capability to drastically change your sound and drastically transform it. And most of the guitarists that I worked with had pedal boards that looked somewhat like this. So in this pedal board, you have each pedal is an independent module. Each pedal is connected to all the other pedals via an input and an output cord. So you see all these little cords going in between the pedals. That connects all the pedals to each other, and there'll be one input from the guitar and one output that goes to the amp. Some of those pedals do different things. All of them are purchased separately, and all of them are analog. They're all boutique, and that's the pros of having a pedal board that looks like this. However, I've also met guitarists that prefer to have a pedal board like this. This is a multi-effects pedal, which under the hood is basically just a computer that you run with your foot, right? So all of the sounds inside of a multi-effects pedal are digital. And what you trade off for this is maybe the sounds aren't as boutique, they're not analog, they might not sound as authentic, might not sound as real, but you get way more sounds and you don't have to deal with like wiring all your pedals together. And thirdly, it's also quite a bit cheaper. One of these pedals may be like $500, $600, whereas I would guess that this pedal board all together probably costs $2,000 or $3,000 or more. And then lastly, there's the pedal board equivalent of spaghetti code. This is I went, when I was searching for this slide, I went and tried to find the worst picture of a pedal board that I could possibly find. And this is pretty bad. Like, not only is it a mess, but you can actually see in the top left, there's even more pedals off of the pedal board. This is a lot of pedals. So in the context of this talk, if in some ways we can think of software like we think of pedal boards. Sometimes with some technologies, we build interconnection, we install everything ourselves. Every single piece of our app is a module that we configure together. It's more like a boutique pedal board. You npm install things, you install libraries left and right, and then you have to kind of mash them together. In my opinion, React can kind of fall into this side, right? So you start a React project, you may have to install a router, set up Webpack, set up Babel, all these things. And each one of them is a little module to your tool chain that you're stitching together. Whereas maybe something like Angular or Vue feels a little bit more like a multi-effects pedal. You install one thing, and for free, you get all of these sounds, with the caveat that you may not be able to have as much custom stuff inside of there. So where Next.js fits in here is that Next.js is built on top of React. So the way that I like to think of Next.js and the way that I like to describe it is it's a framework for the framework. If React is your framework, but you still have to make a lot of decisions, Next.js sits on top of that and makes a lot of those early decisions for you and configures a lot of the stuff for you. Stuff like routing, Babel, Webpack. We'll get into a lot of those decisions that Next.js makes for you. Another word I like to use to describe it is a meta framework, right? So once again, framework for your framework. This is not unheard of. Next.js is certainly not the only player in the meta framework space. If you're familiar with a little tool called Gatsby that's used to make static site generators, I believe the Tinder meetup on Thursday largely went into Gatsby, and they've used it a ton on the Tinder side. Gatsby would fall into this category too. It uses React under the hood, but it adds a lot of its own configuration and opinions on top of that, as well as a plugin ecosystem, data fetching, blah, blah, blah. Another popular meta framework in this case is Create React App. In some ways, Create React App is more geared towards people starting out and people learning React in such a way that Create React App doesn't let you change much under the hood without ejecting. If you're using Create React App, one of the reasons you're using it is because you do not want to mess with the tooling, at least in my opinion. And Create React App is also, mainly supported by the React team. But one of the problems that it was made to solve was that getting started with React and building that pedalboard is very difficult. And that can be really hard if you're just starting out with React. What you really want to do is learn React. You don't want to spend all your time learning Webpack and Babel and JSX and all this stuff. So why Next.js? Why are we talking about Next.js and not Gatsby or Create React App? And to answer this question, that's going to take the rest of this talk. And the rest of this talk is going to largely consist of two questions. And these are two questions that I like to ask myself anytime I'm evaluating a new tool, and especially anytime I'm adopting a new tool as influential as a framework. And those two questions are, is it easy to start? So first off, I want to get up and running fast. I don't want to spend a lot of time configuring things, because configuring things doesn't pay the bills. Usually configuring is what you do before you start writing the app that your users care about. Your users don't care whether you're using Webpack, Rollup, or Parcel under the hood. What they care about is your actual product. And then secondly, is it easy to scale? A lot of frameworks and tools that are easy to start with become incredibly hard over time. So it may be easy within your first week, but what happens 6 months from now? What happens 1 year from now? What happens when we add 20 people to the project? Is it easy to scale? So we're going to start by looking at that is it easy to start question. So before we answer it, let's just acknowledge starting is hard, especially in a modern JavaScript application and especially in a modern React application. Here's just a couple things that you might have to configure before you even can get a hello world in your React application. You have to set up Babel. React uses JSX under the hood, so you're probably going to need Babel of at least a Babel transform for your JSX. And then certainly if you want to use modern JavaScript, modern ECMAScript features, you will probably need some heavier Babel settings. And that alone could be a dive of days, if not weeks. You will probably need Webpack. If you're using modules, a bunch of different files, chances are that you don't want to send 100 files down to your users, but you might actually want to build your app as 100 modules. And Webpack gives you those tools, but once again, hard to configure, very time consuming, very difficult, especially if you're starting out. You will need a router, because if your app has more than one page, you need some way for your app to know which component should I show when the URL shows something else, right? And how should I change that? If you're used to using Create React App, my guess is you've probably used React Router. That's one of the most common routers in the React ecosystem. CSS. Unless your app is styled to look like Craigslist, then you probably need some styles to go along with your app. And in evaluating CSS, you will probably have to decide, am I going to use regular CSS? Am I going to use Sass? Am I going to use less? Am I going to use CSS and JS? How do I get this working in Babel? How do I not send one massive CSS file down to all my users? All those are questions that you likely will have to solve very, very soon, if not over time. And you'll have to bake that into Webpack. So there's kind of a circle there, right, between the CSS and Webpack. You'll want to set up a dev server so that you don't have to be hitting Command R, so that you don't wear down your R key on your keyboard every time that you make a change in one of the source files. You want it to just reload in the browser. You don't want to actually have to manually refresh. This sounds like a small thing, but let me tell you, having it automatically refresh saves so much time, especially when you're just trying to get up and started. And then lastly, unless your app is a front-end only quiz or game or something like that, you probably will need a server. You'll probably need something that talks to a database and that your front-end apps can talk to. So you'll need to spin up a server with some type of database, with some types of endpoints, and then talk to those endpoints in your app. And deciding even with those 6 things, there's so much decision fatigue that happens, right? It's not unheard of to start a React app and spend the first 2 weeks configuring it. I remember starting an app once, and I spent probably a week to 2 weeks setting things up. And a lot of those things were already set up for me. But I still had that much stuff just to set up. And each one of those is a big decision that you have to make. And this is the caveat of having, a pedalboard where each thing is a independent module. The pro is that for each one of those decisions, you can choose exactly what you want. So how does Next help us with this decision fatigue, right? Because that's the real question, is how can we get over this decision fatigue using this tool? So Next ships with something called Create Next App. It's named very similarly after Create React App. And I would recommend for any new Next.js project to start it this way. So you just npm install, or npx is a way of npm of running a command. But npm create next app and then your app's name. And what that will do is that'll bootstrap up a Next.js app. Unlike Create React App, it's a one-time thing. So it's all the stuff that's done by Create Next App isn't hidden inside of scripts. It happens once, and then you can go tweak it to your heart's content. And what that bootstraps up is batteries included. If we look at our list from before, Babel already configured with a very modern default. Webpack already configured with a very performant modern default. Also, CSS already supported. So Next.js gives you CSS in just a default CSS syntax. It gives you CSS in JS via a library called styledjsx. And then it also supports Sass. It's not purely by default, but all you have to do is install Sass. So all you have to type is npm install Sass, and then you can start using SCSS and Sass modules for Next. So all this just with install Next, which is pretty cool. And then also the dev server. So Next.js will handle all that dev server. In the most recent versions, they've actually tapped into React Fast Refresh. So chances are by the time that you're done saving the file in your editor, it's already reloaded on the browser. It's probably already refreshed in the browser before you can even switch tabs, which is pretty impressive. So this leaves us just with the router and the server. And Next.js does handle these things, but these do involve a little more knowledge about how Next.js works under the hood. So these we get for free, but we're going to go into how they work and what Next.js gives us. So Next.js router works based on the file system. If you've worked with Gatsby before, this will look pretty familiar. So what this means is that there's a magic folder inside of your Next.js app, and that magic folder is the pages directory. Everything that you drop inside the pages directory is a page in your app, and it's as simple as that. Every single file inside of pages becomes a route that is named exactly the same as that file. So for index, that's just your regular slash route. So in this case, pages/index is your home of your app. You can put those inside folders if you want. So this would be like /blog. If you had /blog/ I don't know, like about, maybe that would be /blog/about. However, this is great if you know exactly what your routes are, but what happens when you start having dynamic routes? Stuff like Zoom, where we have a meeting ID in the URL, or stuff like GitHub, where you have usernames as part of the URL. So Next.js also gives us a way to express that in the file system itself, and that is via dynamic route files. So in this case, we have a file that has these square brackets around the edge, and what that tells Next.js is that this slug is a URL parameter. And when we're building our pages, when we're fetching our pages for our data, we want to get the value of slug out of the URL and use that to populate our pages. So this really lets you be very expressive in your file system. It's far more expressive than it may seem at first glance. I know for myself, I was very skeptical originally about how flexible, how far that file system router could be pushed. But the introduction of dynamic routes and this next type of routes really, really sold me on it. Lastly, there's a catch-all route. So similar to the dynamic routes, it has square brackets, but it also has these 3 dots inside of the parameter name. And what this gives us is, this allows you to basically scoop up everything in the URL after the file path. So in this case, this would scoop up the entire URL, and then you can and it'll give you back an array of everything that was in that URL split by every slash. So if you had, I used to work in automotive quite a bit. So if you had /2018 /Mercedes-Benz /C-class, you get an array of 2018 Mercedes-Benz C-class. And one of the cool things with that is that if you have really, really dynamic routes that all render the same page under the hood, then you can just kind of scoop those all up into one route and do everything there. If you have really complex routing needs, or maybe you're building a docs website where you want to pull a lot of dynamic things in, then these dynamic routes are really, really useful. So all that leaves us with, so we have a router already configured for us. Now what about that server? Well, Next.js also has a file system router for the API. And this was released maybe like in the past 2 years of Next. And it is also inside the pages directory. So inside of the pages, the magic pages directory, we have a magic API directory as well. And everything inside of that API directory should export a express style controller. And by express style, I mean it's a function that the first argument is request and the second argument is response. And you can basically return those the exact same way that you would in Express.js, and Next.js will pick those up and deploy every single file as a Lambda function. So it works exactly the exact same rules as the pages folder apply to the API folder. So in this case, we would have /API/users/ID. This would translate out to the endpoint of /API/users/123, right? So as far as getting started, we've crossed off that entire list. Certainly there's other problems that you'll have to solve when you're starting out. Stuff like maybe testing, linting, formatting. Are you going to use TypeScript or JavaScript? Stuff like that. But solving even this list of things frees you up to focus on maybe some of those more pertinent decisions to your app. So I like to say that Next.js is easy to start. Like if we ask that question, is it easy to start? I think that the answer is yes. I think it helps you to build your actual app faster and spend less time configuring your actual app. So let's get to that second question though. So the second question is it easy to scale? And the answer for any JavaScript app, mostly any app, is that scaling is hard. Just like starting, Scaling is not easy. If we all knew how to scale apps, we would all be multi-millionaires and be working at, at the highest positions in the highest companies. Scaling apps is something that even the people in the highest positions at the highest companies have not figured out. It is not easy. The reason is, like, we usually start a project, and when we start, it feels like this little cherub. We feel like our code base is going to be perfect. It can do no wrong. It's so innocent. Like, this is going to be the time that we get it right. This is going to be the time that it's perfect. And then we add a developer. That developer starts building features over time. And then you add more developers build more features. Pretty soon, you have a team of 20 developers building 20 features at a time. And then before you know it, your app has turned from a horde of developers, from this little cherub that can do no wrong, into a horde of zombies that's trying to murder you in your sleep, right? So, and literally murder you in your sleep, right? Some of these apps, as they scale, you might be waking up at 2 a.m. answering calls because things broke, because some other developer pushed code, because all of these things. Scaling is not easy, and most apps at some point in their life cycle and the effort to scale will go through some sort of zombie phase. So we have to ask ourselves, what goes into scaling, and what are some concerns that we have that we didn't have when we were starting, that if we neglect these concerns, our app might turn into a zombie. So I'm gonna blast through these really quick, and then we'll dive into how Next.js helps us with each one of these. So performance, we want apps to load fast, and you might not care about this at the very beginning, especially like you're trying to get investor money, you're just trying to get the app working and make sure that it actually works. You might not care if the page doesn't load as fast as it possibly can. But over time, as you add more endpoints, as you add images and all these things, you get to death by 1,000 cuts, and your performance starts to suffer. Your page that once loaded in 1 second now loads in 7, and every second that your page is spent loading is a second that a user could potentially be going to your competitor and spending money there. SEO, if your product is public, chances are you want to be picked up by Googlebot. The difference between the first and second page of Google can amount to thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue that you don't pay any marketing dollars for. So SEO is really, really important as your products start going out to market and as you start trying to get users to use your app. Stability. No one wants to be waking up at 2 a.m. fixing bugs. Also, you want to be able to stay on the latest and greatest technologies. When Next releases a new version, you want to be able to upgrade without having to feel like that you're going to have to spend a week just wrangling dependencies and hunting for bugs and all these things. And this is one of probably the hardest problems in scaling. And this next problem, I think, is the hardest problem in scaling, is team growth. As you throw more people into your app, you have more and more lines of communication. You have more and more engineers that you're trying to keep in sync. And it's really difficult to do that. A lot of the scaling problems that companies have, I would argue, are people problems and not technology problems. And those technology problems are the symptoms of scaling people problems. Custom integration. There's a lot of these things that go into scaling. And when you start out, your app might not be a snowflake, right? Most apps aren't a snowflake. But as time goes on, you might have needs that are unique, and you might need to have the ability to do those custom integrations. And then lastly, internationalization. If you're fortunate enough that people in multiple continents are using your product, it really, really helps your conversions. It really helps your user experience to have pages served in people's native language. So let's go into performance and SEO and see what Next.js gives us on that front. So some of these are actually very recent additions. So Next.js had a huge global user conference yesterday. The videos are still being processed and they'll be up on YouTube in the next couple of days. But they announced a lot of really, really cool things. And this next thing, their built-in image component, is one of those things. If you've built a lot of websites, you probably have felt the burden of image-heavy websites. Images tend to be one of the biggest things contributing to long page loads is too many images, images that are too large, images that are served in the wrong format, or images below your initial view that aren't lazy loaded. And as of yesterday, Next.js just released a new image component. It works very similar to Gatsby's image, if you're familiar with that. That under the hood, it gives you all of those as a default. All you need to do is provide the URL that your image is located at, and Next.js makes sure that at build time and at runtime that your images are served in the best possible format for your users at the best possible time. So if they're all the way at the bottom, they'll be loaded only before they get into view, that they're served at proper sizing, and all these other goodies. So that's one thing that really, really is pushing Next.js forward, really pushing on the performance front. But equally as important is hybrid rendering. And this is something that Next.js has that, at least to my knowledge, none of the other larger frameworks allow you to do. So let's look at some of the different rendering strategies that we can use. Client rendering. So what this is when your user shows up to your app, they get an HTML shell, right? So they get just like maybe your header and footer and some loading indicators. And then after that arrives on your user's device, you go and fetch the data from the API asynchronously, right? So the shell arrives, you fetch the data, and then once the data returns, now your app is ready to go. This is a great way to start out, to be honest. It's very simple. We don't have to think about where our data is being run. It's always run on the user's device. However, as time goes on, you may find there's some caveats to this. Stuff like if you're loading a lot of data, you're now dependent on the user's internet connection. So if someone's on a mobile device really far from an urban center, chances are that making them load a lot of data can burden them on their internet connection, and that means that your app could be just showing a loading indicator for 10 seconds, a minute potentially. Like it all depends on how much data you have. Second big caveat to this, and a reason why a lot of places don't end up with full client rendering, is that if your app is not behind a paywall, if you need SEO, you're serving an empty shell to Google. And Google is able to parse JavaScript and wait, but it does, I believe it does penalize you for it. So it definitely is a lot easier to get high Google rankings if you're not doing client rendering and if you're sending down already baked HTML. So the next two rendering strategies focus on those two questions, right? How can we load data efficiently on the user's device? And two, how can we send down already baked HTML? So server rendering, if you're familiar with something like Rails or JSP, which is Java Server Pages, or WordPress, or Laravel, or Django, or all these other largely backend frameworks, you would call them. This is largely how they would do server rendering. And the flow looks something like this. You start up a server that listens for connections. When that server receives a connection or a request from a user, so the user says, I want to go to this page, your server on the server fetches the data. So usually this means pulling out of a database, and takes your component, the template, and then uses the data to push into the component, and boom, you end up with pre-baked HTML that's ready to go, and then that HTML is actually sent down to the user as the final step. So from the user's perspective, they're getting already built HTML. They don't have to wait on their internet connection for you to fetch data. That's all happening within the server, which is a much shorter distance to travel and a much more predictable speed. Next.js gives us a way to do this via getServerSideProps. So in every page component, you can export a getServerSideProps function. It's an async function that under the hood, all you do is you can fetch your data, and then whatever you return from this will be used as the first set of props to render your component on the server. Just by using getServerSideProps, Next.js knows that you want to render this component on the server, and it will, when deploying, spin it up as a server-side function. So if you're deploying it to a platform like Netlify or Vercel, it will spin up as a Lambda function. If you're deploying a server, you might have to do a little bit extra wrangling to get the files into your server, but it's not difficult. I've deployed Next.js as a server on Heroku, on AWS, on all these things, and getServerSideProps just works. So thirdly, a third approach to rendering is static rendering. And this is kind of the cool kid on the block as far as the last couple of years have gone, especially with platforms like Netlify, with frameworks like Gatsby. Static rendering has become pretty cool lately. And what this looks like is instead of running a server, you have your code and you have your data. So your code could be on your machine. Likely it is on your machine. And your data may be in a database that's fetched over internet connection. And rather than running a server that waits for the user to request, you know which pages you want to build and you know which data you want to use to build those pages. So you run a build step in which you take your code and your data and you mash them together and you end up with pre-baked HTML. So this is very similar to the server-side rendering, with the caveat that this is all happening before a user ever looks at your site. This is all happening during a build step. And Next.js also gives us ways to do this. We can do static props. getStaticProps lets us, similar to getServerSideProps, you fetch your data and getStaticProps. Whatever you return is used to render your component. And then getStaticPaths, which lets you tell which pages you want to render, right? So for those dynamic pages where like maybe you have users with an ID, you don't know what IDs exist in your system at the time. And so getStaticPaths solves that problem. And what this is an async function that returns an array of paths. So you can at build time say like, I want to get all of the users' IDs out of my database. And then for every single ID, I want to use getStaticProps to fetch all of those users' blog posts or something like that. So what Next.js lets us do is it lets us choose our data fetching on a page-by-page basis rather than an app-by-app basis. And this is something that, at least to my knowledge, Gatsby, Create React App, and a lot of these other frameworks don't do, is a lot of these make you decide about your data fetching at the beginning when you're first starting your app, rather than over time. And with Next.js, it becomes really easy to change things. You could start out as a client-rendered app, and over time, when you realize, oh crap, my app takes 20 seconds to load and I have really crappy SEO, you could start turning that into a server-side rendered or a static rendered app. So this solves both the performance and the SEO. As far as scaling, it does make them significantly easier. Not solves them entirely, but definitely makes them easier. So we're going to jump around to custom integration. So if your app is a snowflake, tinkering is possible. You can tinker with the Webpack config, the Babel config, all that stuff, but it is not required. You'll get pretty good defaults, really scalable defaults, just by spinning up a Next app. But if you do want to tinker, Next has a config file where you can override the Babel set or the Webpack settings. You can add environment variables, all this cool stuff. So we can see that we have the ability to do custom integration as well. Let's look at stability. So as far as stability goes, Next.js is incredibly stable. Like I said, I've been with it for the last 7 major versions, and it has been easy to upgrade every single time. I think I can remember twice when a new major version actually introduced a breaking change that influenced me. The most recent Next.js 10 that was released yesterday, I already upgraded my blog to it. All I had to do was install Next 10, throw it up, everything worked. It was amazing. As far as Next also gives TypeScript support out of the box. So this is one thing that really helps with stability, at least in my experience. As apps grow larger, you may want TypeScript. What Next will do is the second that you add a TS file or a TSX file, Next.js will already configure a TypeScript config for you. So they don't ship with TypeScript config out of the box, but the second that you add a file that needs a TypeScript config, boom, already set up. One thing related to stability that Next doesn't set up is a testing framework. So if you need testing for your stability, which I would argue, if you know anything about me, you know that I love testing, but you'll have to make that decision on your own. But even with just knowing that the upgrades are easy and that TypeScript comes out of the box, you can spend now your effort on setting up a testing framework that works for you, something like Jest or Mocha or Cypress or something like that. So we can cross off stability as well on our scaling checklist. So let's look at internationalization. I almost left this slide off, but after yesterday's users conference, I added it back in. Up until yesterday, Next didn't ship with this out of the box. You had to install a couple extra plugins to get internationalized routing. But now out of the box, all you have to do is tell Next.js what languages you want. And it won't translate your app for you, but it will set up all the URLs. So if you want like /en/es, so English and Spanish, /en-UK for English in the UK, then all you have to do is provide an array of all those locales that you want, and Next.js will automatically spin up all your pages at all of those locales. And then lastly, the hardest problem left is team growth. And remember, team growth is a people problem. We can't solve that with a framework, but it certainly can help in some ways. Next.js gives us some established patterns and really good documentation that we can follow. And each of those established patterns have scaling baked in as a default. So when it comes to your team growth, you're not going to be able to solve that with a framework. Like the hardest problems of scaling teams are not code problems. They're people problems. They're what do you do when your team of 3 people is now 20 people across 6 different time zones? They're stuff like what happens when you had 2 people that were sitting next to each other that now are working remotely and having to do all of their PR reviews on GitHub instead of over the shoulder. And these are all very difficult problems, but these aren't problems that Next can solve for us. So, but what it can solve is giving us patterns and once again, freeing us up to spend more of our brain power and more of our effort on those really hard people problems. So as a recap, what does Next.js give us? And this is sort of my sales pitch, right? This is the way that I like to say it in a very short, pithy way. Spend less time wrangling architecture. Instead of building the architecture of your app, spend more time scaling products and teams. Spend your power and your time and your effort building the things that set your app apart from everyone else. And start with a default that really sets you up for success. Start with a default that gives you that architecture out of the box. So once again, Next.js is easy to start, easy to scale. Both those things are incredibly important. If you're just getting started, it's worth your time. It'll teach you some really awesome React patterns. If you're working in enterprise, if you're working for a company, if you have really complex enterprise business needs, it is also easy to scale. We've deployed Next.js for Fortune 500 companies, for small startups, for everything in between. So with that, I just want to say a big thank you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to my pitch on Next.js. I hope that you go spend some time, go check out their docs, go look at what they have to say. Thanks for your time. I'm going to put up the slide with all my socials. And with that, we can open up for questions, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Ben. Basically, if you have questions, go ahead and just unmute yourself. You don't need to wait for any prompts. You can just kind of jump in. And you can use the chat too if you are shy. That's totally fine. We'll read it off if you need that.
Yeah, Vijay, can you read off the chat? I realized with the screen share, I can't see the chat.
All good. Yeah, I got you on the chat.
Sweet. I'll put this back up then.
And you know, if you want to jump in, I'm going to ask some questions too, just for the heck of it. But you know, if you like jump in, go ahead and say anything. And this is for anybody. But yeah, you know, just Ben, what are your thoughts so far on the Next.js conference? You know, what did you think yesterday?
Yeah, so I was not able to attend a lot of it. I attended the keynote and like the first hour of talks. I was mostly listening to the lightning talk stage because I could go in and out. And then I had a buddy that was doing a talk on incremental migration to Next. Everything I heard, I loved, put it that way. But then again, I'm a huge Next.js fanboy. I love Vercel as a hosting platform. So, you know, it's kind of preaching to the choir when it comes to selling me on it. But I left what I saw yesterday, I left it very happy and proud to be part of the Next.js community and the ways that they've been thinking about performance as a default, thinking about scaling and supporting their community. Like the image component has been something that people have been asking for quite a while. I believe, you know, the first time I saw a lot of people asking for it was maybe about a year ago. I would say maybe 3 to 6 months ago, I saw an RFC up for an image component. So Next.js opened up a request for comment. They put up a proposal for it. And, you know, there's a long thread on everyone in the community's thoughts about it. And then they went and delivered, right? So they really do listen to their community, and then they deliver on it. And they deliver it in best of class fashion, at least in my opinion. I don't know if anyone here has used Vercel to deploy, but I can tell you it is a easy deployment. Like Vercel is a one click, one command from the command line deployment, and it's up and it's fast. Not to crap on Netlify. Like I like Netlify too, for the record.
Yeah,
I think Netlify is a great company, a great platform. I know for myself, I switched from all my hosting from Netlify to Vercel like 4 months ago.
wow.
And my build times went down by half. Because I was running out of build minutes on Netlify because I had too many projects. And for Vercel, my build times went down by half because they weren't being throttled, and then it's all still free. It's all connected to Git. I still get a preview URL on every single pull request. It's pretty amazing. I haven't looked too much into some of the other things they announced, but I'm really excited to look into them, like the e-commerce stuff and analytics, web vitals, all that great stuff.
Definitely.
So,
looks like we have some questions so far. So the first question is, are there situations where you recommend not to use Next.js, or is it suitable for all apps of kinds and sizes?
Yeah, so I will say Next is my go-to for any side project. That's because I like building in it. Certainly you could argue that it's overkill on some projects. Your mileage may vary on that front. I would say if you're just learning React to start, Next.js is probably not the right place to start. Spend a little time learning React first. Start with Create React App, follow their tutorial on their docs before you dive into Next.js. But I think it's probably a good second or third step after you learn React, because, and I know it's an employable step too. There are tons of companies hiring for Next.js all over. Like anyone at the conference yesterday saw the massive panel in Discord of all the companies that were doing a career fair. As far as like, are there any apps that it wouldn't apply well? I haven't found one yet. Like I haven't built one where I thought, where I built it using Next, and then I thought to myself, man, that was a mistake. I should have used something else. That said, that's changed a lot since recent versions. So before version 9, I would have said for static websites, use something like Gatsby, Hugo, Jekyll, whatever. For apps that need server rendering, use Next. But in more recent versions, they've added all of the static rendering options. And so really, it doesn't matter how you're rendering your app, you can do it. And at the end of the day, it's just a React app. So I guess I would say that the situations not to use Next would be the situations where you would choose not to use React. Maybe if you need really, really, really high performance, like on rendering, maybe you want to use WebAssembly. Maybe you need Rust or something like that. Maybe you need just vanilla JavaScript. Next.js also makes it really easy to incrementally migrate. So this may be a case where it's hard to put into an existing project that isn't built with it in mind, but it is easy to migrate an existing project over to Next over a few months. And then I guess as a last acknowledgement, if your company is not using React, if your team is not using React, Next.js might not be the right solution. If your team is all in on Vue, surprise, actually there's a framework called Next, so just Next but with a U, that is Next.js for Vue. If you're using Angular, then chances are Next.js is not going to work on your team. Because remember, those are people problems, not code problems.
All right, next question. I think Isaac kind of asked maybe a similar question, but feel free to correct me, Isaac, if you are in disagreement. But next is from Julie, and she asked, can I use multiple context providers with Next.js? And in what case should I use getInitialProps and getServerProps to fetch data from the API? She's been using it for months.
Yeah, sweet. So you can use as many context as providers as you want. So under the hood, each page is just a React component. Let me stop sharing my screen really quick, and I can pull up a Next.js app really quick just to kind of walk through what it looks like. Stop share. One sec. Let's share my other screen.
You got 2 screens now.
Only for when I'm presenting, because I wanted to put my slides up on the second screen.
Very good. Ben is somebody who usually codes with only 1 screen. I didn't
usually. Yeah, he's teasing me about this. Not work. Sorry. Okay. And this is work in progress. So this is my personal website, which is built on top of Next.js. So it was Julie that asked the question.
That's right.
Yeah. So as far as context goes, each one of these pages is its own contained React app. So as far as context goes, you can put whatever context you want at the top. If you're using Redux for that page, you could put a store here. If you want your context, but remember that at the page level, this will be completely torn down every time you navigate, right? So this will not persist across page changes. So if you do need to persist over page changes, you can, Next.js does give us this app_app component that is the shell of everything running on the client. So you can put as many context providers as you want right here. The last professional project I did in Next, we built the entire thing across 3 code bases, hundreds of thousands of lines of code, using only React context. We did not use Redux, MobX, anything like that. And we had most of those contexts lived at the root of the app inside of the app.tsx. As far as like when you should use getInitialProps, I would argue nowadays, Next.js is trying to move everyone away from getInitialProps, to believe it or not, in favor of getServerSide or getStaticProps. But getInitialProps is great still. Like it still works fine. The cool thing with getInitialProps, which for those of you that don't know, it's an older API that Next gives us, that it will run the props generation on the server for the first request, and then all subsequent navigations, it'll run it on the client. So you get kind of this like nice transition. Whereas, so what I would argue, so this is my framework is for deciding, should I use, for example, on this page, should I use getStaticProps? Should I use getServerSideProps? And then should I use getStaticPaths? So if the amount of data that you need for the page is finite or sort of small, but mostly finite, I would go with getStaticProps. If it is not dependent on the user or it dependent on some type of dynamic runtime stuff, if you're okay with it being on a slight delay, like because you need to rebuild the app when that data changes, then use getStaticProps. Try to make as many things static as you can because they'll be pre-optimized. If your data does not need to be, like if you have a user dashboard, right, where it's all behind a paywall, you might just be fine doing client rendering. You might not even need getStaticProps or getServerSideProps. Just fetch the data in the components and it'll be fine. And then lastly, if your data is what I would argue is more like infinitely dynamic data, then go for the server-side props. Or if your data that you're fetching and returning is sensitive, right? So maybe you're fetching some stuff about the user that you don't want to expose back down to the client using getServerSideProps. So none of the pages in this app use getServerSideProps. This is a purely static app. But if you were to just, for example, getServerSideProps, I would argue what you can do is you can fetch your data here. You could like filter out any sensitive info. So I used to work in automotive and we were doing credit apps on people's behalf. So we had to deal with people's social security numbers. And like that was the highest amount of sensitive info that you could handle. And we were really, really careful about where we sent that data and how we handled that data. And that was like really important. If I was, rendering something with someone's social security number and that came back from my API or from the database, that would be something that, well, one, it shouldn't be stored in plain text in the database. That's the first problem. But if it was, for some crazy reason, you don't want to send that down to the client where some random person can just go look in the network tab and check and find maybe someone else's social security number. And then you could send back the data, right? So I would argue that this is a good case for server side. Infinite amounts of data, like let's say you have hundreds of thousands of different types of pages. Like this slug is not just, in this app, this slug fetches from a folder of markdown files, right? So this slug fetches out of this, it fetches out of a folder called writing, and it just fetches each markdown file and builds it, right? There's like 20, 30 pages there. I don't need to run a server to do 20 or 30 pages, but if I had 700,000 pages with editors in, like let's say this is the Washington Post, and they have an editor publishing something like every 5 minutes or every couple seconds, or this is something like Facebook or something like Netflix, where you have hundreds of thousands of entries that are changing very, very, very rapidly. Using, like, it's really easy to insert those into the database very, very rapidly. And that's where you might want that runtime ability of getServerSideProps, where you don't have to rebuild the app every time that data changes. All you have to do is do another database call. So that'll be my criteria for it. I usually try to default to static or client rendered and then fall back to server rendered when that gets painful.
All right. I think actually those are really good explanations, and I think you hit a lot of like almost you hit a lot of really great things that I wanted to break down more later on. But I think like the next question is so it comes from James O, and he says that client rendering is bad for SEO. Do you see a use case to load a page this way? And is there a way to improve SEO with client rendering?
Yeah. So, and yeah, definitely. Thank you, James, for this question. And you hit the nail on the head. Like client rendering really is not great on SEO. It doesn't instantly throw you out of the running. Like I said, Googlebot, I believe in the more recent years, can parse JavaScript, but it kind of it's already a few points against you. So as far as the use case to load pages this way, if your app is behind a paywall, you don't care about SEO. Like Googlebot, so let's say you run a dashboard that you have to have a user account to even see. Googlebot is never ever going to see that dashboard, and you don't care about SEO to that dashboard. What you care about is SEO to your marketing pages that get people signed up to your dashboard. So for example, Facebook doesn't actually need SEO on its main page, or something like Atlassian, like Jira, if you use that, or GitHub. GitHub's actually public, so they need SEO, for example. But those pages that are behind authentication don't need SEO. If you want to bake SEO into it, fine. But Google isn't going to reward you for it because it's behind a paywall. So, and Google isn't logged in. Google is not going to sign up for a user account for your app. So that'll be one case where I could see client rendering being worth it. Certainly, if you want to server render those, great. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But that could be a case where I could see the argument for client render being at least not, SEO is not the reason that you would want client server rendering in that case. Maybe performance is, but SEO is not in that case. As far as improving SEO with client rendering, There are a couple ways. It's not the easiest, but the simple way, so there's a couple services you can purchase. There's a company called Pre-Render, I believe, Pre-Render.io. That what they'll do is the first time that your app is served, it'll be served just normally, and then they'll cache it. So you can designate certain pages as cacheable. I guess another way that you could do that is a CDN. But if you're doing fully client rendering, you're not going to get the client rendered app on the CDN. So as far as improving SEO with client rendering, you're already kind of like a couple steps behind. But I would just say the fastest way to improve your SEO with client rendering is to, if you can pre-render, great. If you could, the fastest that you can make that page load, like if you can get your page loading in less than a second with client rendering, like all power to you, and like you might be fine on the SEO front. And then if you're only client rendering things that aren't important for SEO, like that's fine. You know, if all of your SEO rich content is already baked into the HTML and you're just client rendering like the user's avatar in the top right corner, then that would be a case where that's not going to hurt you on the SEO front. I think you're muted, VJ.
I'll say it again. Oh, it looks like somebody unmuted themselves. It wasn't me because I was talking into a muted mic. But yeah, if you had a question, feel free to ask. And if not, you can throw it in the chat. We had a question from Jas Singh, and he says, what were the build server and services you used that you had mentioned a while ago? Nullify and something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so here, let me share my screen really quick. You're going to see a recursive zoom going on right now. Okay, here. So Netlify. Netlify is a company, they're largely, a lot of people associate them with Gatsby because a lot of the same people have worked at both companies. I don't think they're actually associated with each other, like truly, but they're kind of the go-to for building Gatsby sites and for a lot of static sites. So Netlify gives you a static site server. It's really easy to deploy. If you have a folder with an index.html, you can literally drag the folder from your file system onto the web page and it will deploy. It's that easy to deploy. Certainly there's other ways you can deploy, but if you just wrote like your first website ever with just an index.html, completely hand-coded, all you have to do is pull that index.html into the browser window and it'll kick off a deploy. It'll give you a URL, all this amazing stuff. The other platform is Vercel. So disclaimer, the folks at Vercel are the same folks that make Next.js. So you'll see the same logo and the same branding all across it. For that reason, Next.js, you can deploy it wherever you want. Like it's not tied into Vercel, but deploying Next.js on Vercel is really, really nice. Like there are a couple features that they work on other platforms, but they are easy on Vercel. So stuff like the Lambda functions, stuff like dynamic easy built-in, baked-in redirects, stuff like the server-side rendered components, stuff like that. And the way that you can deploy something to Vercel is, so if we had...
Hey, Ben, just to help somebody out real quick, can you increase your font?
Yes, I can. Better?
Sherry just asked that. So if you're good, Sherry, thumbs up or whatever. Okay, good. She says better.
Sweet. Sweet. And I'll jack these up too. That's a little too large. I'll go to that size. To deploy a site to Vercel, and this is what I was mentioning about that hosting, that process being so easy. This is the only command you have to do. So they'll figure out what type of project you're in. So if I went in, I don't know, VC test or something, cd VC test. Code R. We'll just do an index.html, that's it. And so if you already have an account, then that's it.
Wow.
And if we pulled it up in a separate tab, you can see it's already building on Vercel. Boom. That's it. That's all it takes to deploy once you have an account linked to your GitHub. Similar to Netlify, right? Like all you have to do is drag it in on Netlify. All you have to do is from the command line Vercel, and that's it. So the answer about the hosting platforms, if you're building static sites, those are the two I would go with, and I would highly recommend them both. I'm a Vercel fanboy, but if you are into Netlify, you haven't made a bad decision. Like Netlify is a really great platform as well.
Hey, Ben, have you tried on Heroku, by the way?
I have used Heroku. It's great if you're running servers, I would say that. Like neither Vercel nor Netlify work great. They don't run servers, right? So if you need a database, if you need an actual server running, I have used Heroku quite a bit before for the past few years. My last large Next.js project, we were deployed all on Heroku. So we had 11 microservices on Heroku, 3 Next.js apps on Heroku. It does work, certainly. I'm kind of partial to Vercel. Their pricing model is a lot, you get a lot more for free from Heroku. And like for side projects, I don't want to pay a lot of money. And with Heroku, you also have to pay that like 30-second cost, where Heroku will put all of your servers to sleep. And then if they haven't been hit in over 30 minutes, I believe it takes like, 30 seconds for them to start up if you're not on a paid plan.
Was there any build packs you had to install, or is it just straight out of the box, just deploy it on Heroku and starts?
So last time I deployed it, we were using a custom server where it runs, instead of running like as a static build, it runs as a server that's open to connections.
Gotcha.
So we had to do one setting on the Next.js side, and then to build it as a server. And then the build pack on the Heroku side was just a Node.js build pack.
Got it.
Yeah. Thanks for that. That's a good question. I know a lot of people are deploying things to Heroku.
Yeah, and just kind of like to
It's
add,
great.
The thing is, like, a lot of stuff is kind of serverless now, so you can configure a lot of your server-side needs, on platforms like AWS or whatever you need, so you can build your static site really fast and then set it up on something like Netlify or Vercel, and then as long as you have like a pretty good serverless backend, it should all work pretty well seamlessly.
Yeah, I will say one of the coolest, one of the things that Heroku still has going way in its favor is it is one of the only places on the internet you can get a Postgres database for free.
Yep. And Mongo. Well, actually, Mongo, they got rid of it recently.
Yeah. Did they get rid of MLab?
They did.
Oh, sad day. It all went over to it all went over to the in-house Mongo Atlas or whatever.
You still get MySQL with JawsDB for free.
Nice. Yeah.
So would you compare Next.js similar to Gatsby? Is it more so good for static sites?
Yeah. So up until about a year ago, I would have said, use Gatsby for static sites, use Next for server rendered sites. Since then, I've completely changed my tune. And this is not, saying that anyone has to follow this, my opinions completely. I've stopped building Gatsby sites. My blog used to be a Gatsby site, and then I swapped it over to Next.js because I enjoyed the static build experience with Next so much. The main reason was that the logic for fetching and rendering the pages on the server is located in the same file as the template. Where like I felt there were two main reasons. That was one, and I felt like in my Gatsby apps, it was like split up across the template, the config file, a few places, and I was finding that really hard to trace how things were working. But then again, like I know a lot of people building Gatsby sites, a lot of really awesome devs building Gatsby sites. Like my current company, we build Gatsby sites. So there's nothing, like it's not against Gatsby. This is just my personal preference. The second reason was I felt like my experience working on my website was that I installed a ton of plugins with Gatsby. And every single one of those plugins was another dependency I had to maintain. And then when one of them broke, then it'd just be a massive pain upgrading that dependency. Whereas a lot of the custom behavior in Next tends to be recipe based. So in their main repo, they have an examples folder, and then you go through the examples, and it basically just shows you how to configure most things. So if you want to add, I don't know, Google Analytics, there's not like a Google Analytics plugin. It just shows you how to configure it, and you just copy paste the code from the examples. And I found that worked. I liked that better. It was easier for me to tinker with my site and change it around as time went on. So those were the reasons I've kind of stopped using Gatsby sites. But then again, like I think it sits in the same space as Gatsby now. But if you need those hybrid rendering, or if you might need the hybrid rendering or server rendering at some later date, it's definitely a good choice for that, I would say. Gatsby has the themes, I will say that. Like if you need, like if you're doing like themes and stuff in Gatsby, like that's something that just doesn't exist in the Next.js world. And then the same thing with the plugins. Like if you're using those features from Gatsby, I haven't used them much, I'll be honest. You're not going to get that with Next.js.
Though I saw Vercel recently actually launched a theme for their e-commerce platform.
Yeah, I think they launched it yesterday.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah, they announced it in the keynote at the conference.
Hey Ray, just real quick, since you're talking about yesterday's conference, was there anything you liked from the conference?
I actually didn't watch the conference at all. It's just
okay.
One of my other developer friends got an e-commerce platform that we're building, and he mentioned that, hey, Vercel launched pretty slick, out of the box e-commerce. They can just set right up very easily.
I see. Did anybody from here watch the conference? Just curious.
Yeah, I got to watch a lot of the conference.
Awesome. What'd you like? What do you think?
There was this one talk about CMS and how to decide what CMS system you want to use, and also how to migrate over to a different one. And he gave you a great talk on how to answer your questions, and then how to figure out which ones have that's what you need. And then sometimes you just got to get into it and try it out, get your feet wet and see what parts are challenging, and basically go with the best one.
That was with Sean Davis, right? He was
Sean C. Davis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pull up my screen.
That's very good. And then I think there was another one that spoke about Next Directs, and I think it was Lydia Haley who did it.
Lydia Haley. Okay.
I think it was her, but she was talking about
incremental adopting
redirects and rewrites.
Okay.
And how you would use those two to help you migrate from like WordPress over to Next in a slowly progressive way, so you don't have to do it all in one go.
Yeah, they just released those a month ago. It's like super cool.
Yeah, which is great, because that's maybe something that I may be having to do. But yeah, it was really exciting. I just learned about headless CMS systems. And one guy was going really quick on using Storyblock. I think he works there, and he was just showing us how to use it really quick. And another guy did a talk on Amplify, and he went really quick. on how to set up an entire blog with admin and login.
I remember that. Yeah, yeah. He was the AWS guy, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that guy.
Fast. I was like, wow, I'm not even watching this 2-speed, and you know, I feel
It
like
was so fast.
yeah, yeah, that guy was good. You know, I think he was going fast, and he made some mistakes though. But like even then, like it was still impressive.
I just want to watch more of the videos though, because a lot of it overlapped.
Yeah, yeah, that's not something I like either. Like when a conference overlaps with another one, but I guess like they have a lot to get through.
I believe all the videos will be uploaded to YouTube in a couple days. They're processing and editing through them right now. So if anyone missed the keynote, you can watch the keynote right now. Like you're on the conference right now. I believe if you go to stage N, the keynote is still playing because it was pre-recorded. So you can I think if you just click on the keynote, it'll go to click on stage N up in the top.
Oh, up here. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think all you have to do is put in your email, and it'll play the keynote, I believe.
Okay. I guess we'll.
So if anyone missed it,
yeah, they can. I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah.
So is Vercel kind of relatively new cloud service? Has it been out for a while, or?
Yeah.
So I started hearing it since yesterday.
Yeah. So Vercel used to be called Now. And the company used to be called Zeit. So if you heard of a company called Zeit and a platform called Now, I think 6 months ago, maybe 9 months ago, they finished a round of funding, and as part of, I believe, bring in the investors, part of scaling up, they changed their name. So Vercel, they had a big blog post on it. I don't remember what it means, but they used to be called Zeit. So I don't know if you've heard that.
Yeah. By the way, it looks like somebody's raising their hand. Julie, did you have a question?
Yeah.
I've not seen the hand feature in a while, so if you want to unmute yourself, you can. If you are a chat person, that's fine. I'll look for it. Okay, well, let me know. Like, you can cut me off if you want, like if you have a question. But yeah, just you know, I think Vercel is pretty awesome too. I actually kind of accidentally discovered them, and it wasn't through Next.js. I was just looking for a really good console for Windows. Since I started using Windows a lot more. This is my MacBook, so I'm on Mac, but you know, as you know, Windows is not very user-friendly when it comes to command line, other than PowerShell, which I think is its own beast. But I found this, you know, app called Hyper, and I thought this was really great. Like this is kind of you know, really cool command line in itself, and it works pretty great between all three platforms, so Windows, Linux, and Mac. So you know, it's just one more thing, and I think it's really cool because you can customize a lot of the properties in JSON JavaScript, which is awesome. So I think it's running Electron underneath the hood. So if anybody wants to try this out, yeah, I recommend it. It's hyper.is. So I'll link for that in the chat. But that's how I actually discovered Vercel.
Yeah. Yeah, they're some pretty cool dudes, pretty cool people. Like they're the real deal. Like they know how to build some pretty awesome products.
And I think they're in Walnut, right? That's what I heard.
I think they're based out of San Francisco.
Okay.
So to my knowledge, the company itself is distributed and has been for a long time. The core team, I believe, is based out of San Francisco.
Gotcha. All right. So anybody else want to say anything? I guess kind of coming to an end here for today. Is there anything that you guys are excited about, you know, as far as web development? Maybe another conference you are interested in? Maybe something you're working on you want to see, you know, represented with HackBuddy or JavaScript LA?
I guess this might be a personal question for Ben. How do you keep yourself so active and so up to date with all these new frameworks? I mean, I've kind of been following you and watching you since, you know, your auto gravity days, and it's just like
Oh man.
you have so much energy and so much enthusiasm discovering all these new frameworks. And even I don't even know how you have find time to work with this with a full-time job and have all these side projects going on with. So what's your magic?
Yeah.
What do you do?
So sometimes I don't know how I manage to do it. And my wife's saying in the chat that I'm freaking awesome. Thank you, Christy. So I have a couple of things, and like, so one, I don't focus on coding every day. And there's nothing wrong with doing 100 days of code. There's nothing wrong with doing a marathon and trying to have your GitHub be all green. That didn't work for me. Like I've done that in the past. I've gone on coding marathons, and it's a lot. So one, I don't focus on coding every day, and like I code for fun when it's fun. That's one aspect. My first manager at Autogravity had a saying that went along the lines of when you're learning, take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And the whole premise behind that was if you're trying to stay up to date, if you're trying to level up on code or on some knowledge, and just as a strategy for learning is you do 2 steps on 2 things that are cutting edge, right? So you learn, I don't know, Next.JS, and I like to be in the React space, so maybe React concurrent mode. Or if you're really into CSS, you learn about like some latest and greatest CSS properties, CSS Houdini for something like that. And then but if you only go after whatever is like hyped at the moment, you end up kind of all hype, no substance. And so the key is that after you take those two things new, you do 1 step back and you go back to fundamentals. So you learn it, and it doesn't have to be computer science fundamentals, although that could definitely qualify. So you do your 2 steps forward, you do 2 cutting edge things that are cool and awesome and like really, really hyped. And then you go back and you say, I'm going to study, I don't know, sorting algorithms, or I'm going to study how HTTP works under the hood. I'm going to study semantic HTML and accessibility, things like that. So that's one approach I've taken. As far as like, how do you fit it into life? To be honest, I'm always kind of walking that line, and like, it's not easy. Definitely, I view coding as a hobby in addition to work. So I try not to overwork at work. I find that if I'm overworking at work, I usually don't find myself learning a lot of new things on the side. So I try to not overwork. Obviously, you try not to underwork, but I try not to burn myself out on that front. I use Twitter to stay up to date. So if I can do a shameless plug and drop my links again in the chat. So
Of course.
if you're trying to stay up to date with what I'm doing, Twitter is probably the most up to date with, like, I might not tweet a lot of stuff myself, but I usually retweet a lot of stuff that I find interesting. And I just tried to curate stuff from a lot of industry leaders. So I'd say find, whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever, find a couple people that are awesome in whatever field you want to stay up to date in, and like they're the people. And then you just kind of watch what's going on Twitter. For myself, that works because I like Twitter as a social media platform. And then I've lately, what I've been trying to do is just optimize for small wins. So if I can get something done in like 30 minutes, twice a week, that's better than like trying to set aside an entire weekend when, like, I now live in Seattle. I was living in Orange County. I just moved up to Seattle. Like that's, a Saturday where I could be out hiking and enjoying the crisp fall weather, or hanging out with my wife, or doing chores, or so many other things. And when I get to spend it coding, that's fun, certainly, but that doesn't always happen. And so optimizing my side projects and learning for small little bursts has really helped as well. So that's a few things. And then I've also had, like, at AutoGravity and at my last job at SourceStrike, we were really working with a lot of cutting edge technology. So you also got to bake it into your day-to-day at work. So that's a few things. I don't know if that that helps. Feel free to hit me up on really any of those platforms. I'm happy to chat more about sort of how I go about that.
I'll just add real quick, like in the time, like I've known Ben and gotten to know him again a little bit more, you know, just kind of working with him behind the scenes on JavaScript LA and HackBuddy, like especially with Team Hack. I know that, you know, Ben is really, really in touch with, you know, a lot of the open source community. I mean, he, you know, has said to me too that he will go and take a look at a lot of the upcoming projects, and you know, he'll kind of, you know, I guess like I'm maybe speaking more than I should, but you'll probably, he said that he kind of like drive by, you know, helps out with some of those projects. Like, so, you know, there was one that both of us were kind of looking at called Blitz, which is kind of like the next level of Next.js. It's like a Ruby on Rails version.
There are a couple of talks at the conference on that too.
Yeah. And so I know that Ben, like, you know, everything he's saying, like, you know, as far as, you know, like having a life balance, all of that matters. But like when he's actually into like coding, he like completely dials in. Like, you know, he really like, he jumps in 110%. And so, you know, I think that that says a lot, right? Like you can study a lot, but sometimes your focus is kind of out of whack. And, you know, if you don't give yourself enough time to kind of recuperate and, you know, just, you know, have that like relaxation time, it's kind of hard because then like the more you study, like the less you learn. So you kind of have to give yourself enough rest so that when you come back into coding, you love it. It's kind of like you're in a good mood, right? So I think that he does that really well. And maybe that's something that's not spoken out a lot. You know, I think in our community, we tend to kind of think that we have to code and code and code for hours and hours and hours. But that kind of leads to burnout. Whereas when you can approach it, you know, in these segmented times, like you can maximize like your focus and do some really great stuff.
Yeah, I can speak a little to that. I would say also, like, building projects over following tutorials is 5,000,000% worth it. There's nothing wrong with tutorials. They're definitely good, especially if you're learning something for the first time. But there's a reason why a lot of people talk about tutorial hell. I think that's what people call it, at least from what I've seen on the internet, where you find yourself stuck in, like, you're always watching tutorials, and then when you go to build the app from the tutorial without it, you're like, I can't do it. And that's hard, and like that happens. Like I've bought video courses too, and like, you know, you learn stuff from it, but I will say that it is like way infinitely better as from a learning side. Maybe for myself, I'm kind of a kinesthetic, like I kind of have to do it to learn it, and I have to suffer through it. So building side projects really helps. And I don't have a lot of like cool side projects, to be honest. I don't think, like, my blog is my biggest side project. I'm constantly refactoring that, constantly tinkering on it. And my mantra on my blog is do it like if I was running the engineering organization, this is the way it would be. So, or like everything that I would want to try out that I'm not ready to try out on a professional level. So lately I've been trying out documentation strategies and how do you just do it in a way that lets you keep moving forward. But I just do that on my blog while I'm adding little features to it. The rest of my side projects are kind of like, you know, little one-offs. A lot of times they never get finished. A lot of times they never get finished, but it's just about the stuff you learn along the way. Lately, I've been using Twitch to force myself. So, I mean, if anyone wants to see some Next.js in action, I'm actually going to stream some of that tomorrow night. Yeah, but Next.js, like, one thing I found fun about the live stream is that it forces me to stay very on task.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody else have questions? Everybody pretty cool right now, or? Anything else on your mind? I always want to give people enough time to, just kind of ask questions because, I think that's kind of like the benefit of having, a group meeting like this. We have a YouTube channel where people can go afterwards and watch videos, but I feel like, it's not as interactive. So, if you have a question or something, go for it. It's like Sherry has a question. She says, do you make it a point to exercise or eat breakfast to start your day?
So I'm just waiting for Chrissy to pop into the chat and say something snarky. We eat breakfast every day. I was not always the best at that. A lot of times I would go, before I got married, go on a cup of coffee or a granola bar or something like that for breakfast. Now we eat breakfast every morning. I am not a morning person. I'm a night owl. So as far as exercising, I'm not a big exerciser. We do some passive exercising. Like, it's beautiful here in Washington right now, so I go on a lot of walks throughout the day. They help me clear my head. So lately, like where our apartment is, we have this huge hill with a really nice steep incline, so that does help like it be a little exercise, but I'm not a big exerciser, and that's just me. I probably should be, but I'm gonna be straight up honest. I'm not a big exerciser.
Yeah, your wife says chips are not a meal.
Yeah. See? Yeah, Sherry agrees though.
Yeah, chips are not a meal. Yeah. eat more, Ben.
I do eat.
Okay. All right. I think, yeah, if nothing else, like it is 8:35 here, so we can call it a night. I think I guess I'll just kind of remind everybody one more time about the group, because I did have some questions at the beginning, and I want to make sure those were answered. The website is javascriptla.net, and we will be transitioning over to hackbuddy.com, but that is still kind of like a 90-day out project. For now, just we are like slowly doing it, so everybody kind of is aware and knows what to do. So the URLs are the main things you want to pay attention to. The YouTube channel is now hackbuddyorg, and that's really where you want to go to, like, see these videos afterwards, or if you missed a video from a meetup, you can go and check it out there. LinkedIn is good. I encourage everybody here on this call to actually to share their LinkedIn. That is a good way to just kind of continue networking and just continuing conversations. You never know where things may go from there. Obviously, I want to say, as you share any kind of links, be honest. Don't try to spam somebody or pretend to be somebody's friend and then try to like trick them into doing something that is unethical. So we have been getting a lot of and I think this is a normal thing as we get bigger. We've been getting a lot of like weird people joining the group, and sometimes some of those people are spammers. So it's just something that happens. So as that happens, I want to make sure that people are safe, and security is something that we take seriously here. So we want to make sure you guys are all safe. So be sure that whoever you're connecting with is somebody that you are like you trust and you think that they're a legitimate person. And then if you want to connect with us on a more formalized way, we have the Discord channel, which I recommend almost like every meetup. I'll give a link to everybody right here, and it's really easy to get onto our Discord. You can either get the link through this chat, or you can go to our website, which I just mentioned, and you can click on the link that says Discord, and basically you can go there. So here's a link to Discord. And that's a good way to stay in touch with myself. Ben, who is frequently on it, if you want to see his Twitch, he has full reign to advertise as much as he wants on our board, because he's cool guy like that, like for all his help with JavaScript LA, HackBuddy, and Team Hack. He's got it. So, oh, and
like I said, I'll be on tomorrow night on Twitch live coding some Next.js. I think we're gonna build a timer app, something like that. So Next.js, JavaScript, all that fun stuff. So if anyone is interested, come hang out. For Sherry, I think probably about 5:30 or 6. I'll post it in Discord.
yeah, for sure. It's a good way to, keep in, keep on top of what you learn, because like, you never know when you'll need it. So practice often. That's what we're all about. Like just real quick with Team Hack. And then I think Ben, you can, if you want to address any of the questions about timing, you can in the chat. But essentially, this is a good way for people who want to practice what they see in these meetups, because I know that you can watch these meetups, on YouTube, or, you can come to the Zoom meetings and all that. But if you want to practice the stuff and really just get good and hone your skill, I encourage you all to join teamhack.org. It's a good way to basically practice, level up. I built this because, it was kind of a frustration point for me when I would go and interview and I would meet a lot of, people who said, oh, well, you don't have this skill or you don't have that skill. But I know in the back of my head, like I could probably figure it out. And so, I think like by just having a little bit more projects, kind of like how Ben does, right? Like he does a lot of projects. I just wanted to do some projects together with people and do it right. So we have, this Team Hack page. We have the GitHub page where you can go and start looking at some of the repos. I encourage anybody who's interested to kind of go and check out the coding guidelines. That's the best way to learn about how to get started. We will try to meet every 2 weeks. That's the schedule we're following. So next Tuesday, we'll have a Team Hack meet again. And basically, if you want to keep on top of the things that we're coding, right now we are working on a React component storybook, which is a storybook.js. Ben kind of like already, pushed a repo, which is pretty cool. So feel free to clone it. And then feel free to read through it, try it out, and then submit any issues that you want. Right now, like the main issue is on our project board that we need a wireframe. So we're working on that. But as we continue to build, we'll continue to add issues and build it out professionally, just like a real Git organization. So that's pretty fun. I think you'll learn a lot about how to Git, how to work with an organization. You can pair program with us, either with these Twitch live streams or together as a group. And you can do like React, Redux, you can do Next.js, whatever you want with us. It's pretty much free flow right now. It's an open board. So with that, I want to thank you all again for coming. And Ben, do you have anything else to say?
Nothing else about Next.js. Like I said, I can do a shameless plug for myself. Here, I'll drop all my links once again on Twitter or in the chat. If you want to stay up to date with what I'm doing, those 3 places are the best spot. Yeah, kind of all of the different levels of interaction. Twitter, a little more real time, but written, my blog, purely written, not nearly as frequent, and then Twitch, completely interactive via the chat. But I'm very new to Twitch right now. I'm still figuring it out. It's been a lot of fun. And yeah, so yeah, that's all I have left to say is just kind of a shameless plug. If you like what you hear, like, please feel free to follow. Please feel free to reach out with any questions, whether that's on Twitter or LinkedIn. If you do connect with me on LinkedIn after this talk, please reference the talk so that I can know that you're not a bot or a scammer. I've been getting a lot of bots and scammers on LinkedIn lately. So just reference like, hey, like I really enjoyed the talk. I'd love to connect. And that's enough for me to know like this isn't a bot or a scammer.
Yeah, everyone please stay safe. We're all remote, so security is really important to be aware of the emails and links and PDFs and stuff you're clicking on, as those things may contain Trojan horses and any kind of keyloggers. So we want you all to be really safe and scan those files. And then, yeah, I think that's it. Like, it looks like everybody else is saying thank you. if we missed your questions tonight, feel free to just reach out to me on Discord and I'll help you out. And we'll love to see you all at the next meetup. Thank you all.
Thanks, VJ and Ben.
Yep, thank you. All right, good night, everybody.
Good night.